Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing my Rolex Submariner date 116610LN. I bought this watch from a Rolex authorised dealer for €8,650. So firstly, let's look at the box that the Rolex Submariner date comes in, and then I'll talk you through the other items one gets with the piece. So the Submariner date watch box is protected by this magnolia coloured cardboard outer watch box which has the Rolex coronet embossed on the lid. So one removes the lid to the cardboard box and pulls down the flap, and as you can see the flap is branded with the gold Rolex coronet and the Rolex brand name in Garamond font in green. Now with regards to the watch box itself, the first thing I want to say is it's a disappointment. This is a high tier piece at €8,650, and I think this kind of watch box is acceptable for mid-tier pieces, but when one gets to the high tier, really Rolex should be using higher quality watch boxes. The watch box is finished to a high standard, but however I'm critical of the materials used. It's a wooden watch box which is coated fully with a green vinyl plastic, and I really think the vinyl plastic cheapens the watch box. Yes, it does have an aesthetically pleasing gold Rolex coronet embossed on the lid, but really the PVC vinyl used is just very poor quality. It's got a grained finish which replicates leather, but it's clear that it's not genuine leather. I would like to see Rolex using solid wooden boxes which are high lacquered to a glossy finish, or alternatively I would like to see them use wooden watch boxes which are coated in genuine green leather rather than this abhorrent vinyl plastic. But that's the watch box one gets with the piece. Now with regards to the interior, it's fully upholstered as you can see with an aesthetically pleasing magnolia coloured suede effect fabric. Inside the lid it has a Rolex branded with a gold coronet and the green Rolex logo compartment, so one can pull down the lid to the compartment, and that's where one stores the warranty cards, the owner's instruction manual and the international guarantee booklet. So useful compartment to have. The watch itself sits on a padded pillow cushion as one would expect, which is finished to a very good standard with the suede effect fabric. One also gets a superlative certified chronometer tag which has a hologram. As you can see, it changes colour in the light, and on the reverse it says Rolex SA Geneva. So a nice touch to get this tag confirming that the movements used in the Submariner date, the caliber 3135, is a superlative chronometer, and it's certified by COSC. So the watch box is finished to a good standard, but really I think there's room for improvements, and as I said before, I think this really is the kind of watch box that one expects with a mid-tier piece, not a high-tier piece. So with regards to the other items one gets with the watch, the plastic warranty card comes in this genuine leather wallet, and as you can see it has the reference number of the piece 116610LN. The LN stands for Lunette Negro in French, which means black bezel, and it says steel bracelet, which refers to the oyster bracelets used on the Submariner date. So I'm pleased to report that the Submariner date comes with a 5-year international warranty, which is activated when one purchases the piece at a Rolex authorised dealer. On the reverse of the leather wallet, one has the Rolex brand logo and the coronet in gold, which is very aesthetically pleasing, and one also has the international worldwide service booklet which details the terms and conditions of the 5-year warranty, and also where to get your watch serviced throughout their global network of authorised dealers. So useful read. Lastly, one also gets a Submariner date owner's manual. Very useful read if you're unfamiliar with the Submariner date and the operation of the triplock crown, and also the caliber 3135 movement used in the piece. So good diagrams, very thorough, and it goes into good detail how to operate every aspect, including the glide lock clasp used in the oyster bracelet. So a very well written and well designed owner's manual, and although it's only in English, it is a useful read, providing you can understand English of course. So with regards to the watch itself, I'll talk you through the specifications of the Submariner date. 40mm case. It has a 48mm lug-to-lug measurement. Now, I just want to say, I consider 48mm to be the sweet spot. It is the perfect lug-to-lug measurement for all wrist sizes. Regardless of whether you're a collector with a smaller wrist of 6 to 7 inches or a collector with a larger wrist like myself of 7 to 8 inches respectively, 48mm will fit you to perfection. So I really like that aspect of the Submariner Super Case. 12.5mm thick, and it has a lug width of 20mm. The Oyster bracelet tapers from 20mm at the lugs down to 16mm at the glide lock clasp. Now, this is something I'm critical of. When Rolex introduced the Super Case, when they upgraded from the classic case used in the 16610, I think they made a mistake. Often collectors are critical of the thick square lug profile to this Super Case, and I concur with that sentiment. I think that Rolex should have scaled up the proportions of the Oyster bracelet from 20mm to 22 and have the taper from 22 at the lugs down to 18mm at the glide lock. I think that 20mm tapering down to 16 means that the bracelet is too slender. The problem with that is the Super Case wears like a thick square slab of metal on the wrist. It's a top heavy head of the piece, and really the Oyster bracelet with the glide lock doesn't balance that top heavy heft of the piece. So I think they made a mistake. I think the 16610 classic case is more aesthetically pleasing with the taper of the lugs, and I think the taper of the lugs on the 16610 really do match the 20 to 16 taper of the Oyster bracelet. So I think there is room for improvements on the proportions of the case, although I do like the 48mm lug to lug, and I also like the 12.5mm thickness. So with regards to the rest of the specification, 300 meters water resistance, and the trip lock crown provides an effective hermetic seal to 300 meters. Coin edge finish, solid stainless steel, 3 rubber O-rings, hence the name trip lock. So a very well executed crown, and it's signed with the Rolex coronet and 3 dots to represent the fact it's a trip lock crown. One thing I want to give due credit to Rolex for is the execution of the crown in terms of the operation. It's silky smooth. The internal threading of the solid stainless steel crown and the external threading of the stainless steel crown tube mesh to perfection. It's one of the smoothest crown actions I've ever experienced on a watch. I consider it to be the ultimate crown action. Now, the movement has hand binding and hacking, so it's very easy to familiarise oneself with the different positions of the crown in terms of setting the hands, setting the date complication, or manually winding the piece. Now, with regards to the rest of the specification, it has a 120 click unidirectional bezel, and the bezel insert is made from Cerachrome, which is a type of ceramic. So I'll explain how the Cerachrome insert is made. Rolex heat up the Cerachrome to the very high temperature of 1600 degrees Celsius, and they then sinter the Cerachrome. They sinter the Cerachrome and melt in platinum into the engraved minute ticks and also the numerals. So the numerals and the minute ticks on this Cerachrome bezel are in fact platinum rather than white paint. Now it might surprise you, but I actually dislike the use of platinum on the Cerachrome bezel. I actually think Rolex made a mistake and they should have simply used white paint. Or alternatively, they could have used a lume sapphire bezel insert as used on the Pelagos, which uses superluminova. And I think a lumed sapphire bezel would have been more aesthetically pleasing on the Submariner and also more functional. Alternatively, they could have simply used white paint rather than platinum, which would have actually been more legible. The problem with platinum is it has a matte silver finish. It's rather dull, and it's not actually as legible in daylight as white paint. So white paint would have been less expensive, but I actually think it would have been more effective than the sintered Cerachrome with platinum. With regards to the dial, it's very clearly legible. It's got the classic Submariner maxi dial layout. Applied indices are white gold. The Mercedes hands are also made from white gold. Done to a very high standard, but unfortunately they've made the mistake of over-branding the dial with specification and text at the 6 o'clock position. The original Submariner from 1953, the 6204 and 6205 respectively, simply said Submariner at the 6 o'clock position. They didn't have the water resistance rating, and they certainly didn't have superlative chronometer officially certified. I really think 4 lines of text at the 6 o'clock position is over-branding. Now, with regards to the case back, it's very boring and plain to look at because it's simply a brushed satin finished centre and a mirror polished circumference to the solid stainless steel screw down case back. I personally would prefer to see that specification, the water resistance 300 metres, 1,000 feet, superlative chronometer officially certified. All of that information could be engraved on the case back with a Rolex and the coronet. And I really think they make a mistake by printing it all on the dial at 6 o'clock and leaving the case back blank. I would prefer to see the specification on the case back and a cleaner, minimalist looking dial with simply Rolex with the coronet at 12 o'clock and Submariner at the 6 o'clock position. With regards to dial text and branding, I think it's a case of less is more, and I think it would be just a cleaner looking dial, more like a Bauhaus German design. So the applied indices on the maxi dial are well executed. The white gold indices are infilled with Rolex Chromolite lume, which is very well executed. It's done to a very high standard. Date complication, white date wheel with black numerals, clearly legible. The Cyclops magnifier is done to perfection. It has AR coating on the inside and it magnifies the date complication by 2.5 times. The best Cyclops magnifier I have ever seen on a sapphire crystal. It's often the case that Cyclops magnifiers only magnify the date complication by 1.5 or 2 times, but on a Rolex it's 2.5 times magnification, which is the ultimate. Now, with regards to sapphire crystal, it's flat, so it's highly reflective, as you can see when I tilt the piece at an oblique angle. However, a criticism I have of the sapphire crystal is there is no anti-reflective coating on the underside. So as you can see, it makes dial legibility hard to read. Really, I think Rolex have made a mistake in not using AR coating on the sapphire crystal. They do use AR coating on the underside of the Cyclops magnifier, so it's a contradiction because one has AR coating on the Cyclops, but one doesn't get AR coating on the underside of the sapphire crystal itself. With regards to the Rehort, it's laser engraved to a very high standard, and it has the serial number laser engraved into the Rehort at the 6 o'clock position. So very well executed dial, very well executed Rehort. The Cerachrome bezel is also done to a flawless finish. It really is very aesthetically pleasing the way it's glossy, which contrasts with the matte platinum which is inlaid into it. With regards to the bezel itself, I actually dislike it. The teeth to the bezel actually feel quite sharp and they feel scratchy, so when one grips the 120 click unidirectional bezel between one's index finger and thumb, the teeth, the scalloping is quite sharp, so they actually dig into one's skin. It's not a pleasant bezel to actually grip. I actually prefer the Steinhardt Ocean 1 bezel to this Submariner Dates bezel because on the Steinhardt Ocean 1, the scalloping on the teeth is deeper. They have bigger scallops and the teeth points aren't actually as sharp, so it's actually more pleasant to grip. It doesn't dig into one's skin. It doesn't feel as scratchy to grip. So although the execution of the bezel is very good, it is very grippy, which is the purpose of a rotating diving timing bezel. I actually don't find it to be pleasurable to use, and I think that the Steinhardt Ocean 1 bezel is better done. Lume pip on the triangle at 12 o'clock, perfect alignment as one would expect. With regards to the action, the 120 clicks feel very lightweight, and this is something else I dislike about Rolex bezel actions. Yes, there is no backplay whatsoever. The execution is very good, but it just feels too light. I prefer a heavier bezel action as used on the Omega Planet Ocean or alternatively the Steinhardt Ocean 1. I like heavier clicks, I like louder clicks, and I just like a more positive action in terms of resistance. I like to feel more resistance. I always think that Rolex Submariner bezels turn too lightly with too little resistance. They need to be firmer. So I don't like the light clicks and I don't like the fact that the teeth are sharp. So they are my main criticisms of the bezel itself. With regards to the case back, as I've discussed, it's brushed satin finish to a very high standard and mirror polish to a flawless standard on the circumference. But it's just very plain and boring to look at. I would prefer if Rolex used an exhibition case back to show off the caliber 3135, or alternatively, as I've discussed, engrave the case back to make it more aesthetically pleasing. With regards to the Oyster bracelets, the 904L stainless steel is brushed into a very aesthetically pleasing satin finish. Some of the best satin brushing I have ever seen on an oyster bracelet. The grains of the 904L oyster steel simply are done to perfection. Lovely sheen to it, which looks different to 316L grade stainless steel, which is often used in dive pieces. The fit of the solid end links is perfect to the super case, as one would expect. No play whatsoever. Very nice form to the end link where it meets the end of the oyster bracelet. The flanks of the oyster bracelet are polished to a flawless mirror finish, and it uses 1.6mm screw pins, which is very aesthetically pleasing and also done to a very high standard. With regards to the glide lock clasp, I'm not personally a fan of the glide lock. Yes, it's finished to a very high standard. Brush satin finish on the top side, underside, mirror polish finish to a flawless standard on the flanks. Very nice action to it. It's signed with the Rolex coronet embossed, as you can see on the flip block. Easy to open, nice positive click, and it also has a nice trigger action, as you can see, to the glide lock itself. The interior is beautifully engraved with the Rolex and the coronet, and it really is polished to a flawless mirror standard. One of the best interiors to a solid mill clasp I've ever seen. I really like the execution of it. The build quality of the glide lock is done to perfection. On the underside, it has a glide lock, so it's easy to adjust the length of the bracelet using the glide lock. Very well executed, and it pops in and out with a very positive click, so that's something that is very well done. Personally, I would prefer to see Rolex use a 2-button push trigger mechanism rather than a flip lock on the glide lock. I recently reviewed a Christopher Ward C65 Dartmouth, and I actually prefer the 2-button push action of their clasp, or alternatively the 2-button push clasp that Omega are using on the Planet Ocean. I think it's better done than the glide lock. So with regards to the finishing, it's outstanding both on the glide lock and also on the oyster bracelet. The case is polished to a flawless mirror finish on the flanks, very high standard, very aesthetically pleasing to look at. Flawless brush satin finish to the tops of the lugs and also the underside of the case. So with regards to the weight of the piece, with all 12 links in the oyster bracelet, this weighs 155 grams. So although it's a 40mm, it does wear with some heft on the wrist. It has wrist presence due to the block-like profile of the super case, and that's 150 gram weight. Now, I have an 8-inch wrist, and I personally like dive watches to have heft. I like 150 gram weight, so 155 grams does feel very satisfying on the wrist because it does give wrist presence, and it also feels like it's a heavy piece with 150 grams of heft. So that's something I like. Now, with regards to the movement used in the piece, it uses the caliber 3135, which Rolex has been using since 1988. So it's a very reliable, well-proven, technically excellent movement. I consider the Rolex caliber 3135 to be one of the greatest Rolex movements ever made. 31 joules, it has hand winding and hacking, as I've discussed, and it has a 48-hour power reserve. It runs at the industry standard of 28,800 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 4 Hz. I've discussed this in previous reviews, but I'm going to reiterate it. I consider 28,800 vibrations per hour and a frequency of 4 Hz to be the sweet spot. I consider it to be the perfect compromise between power reserve and accuracy with regards to automatic movements, and that's the reason why it's become the industry standard. The benefit of a 28,800 vibrations per hour movement and the 4 Hz frequency is it has the positive effect of a very smooth sweep to the second hand. So I want you to look closely at the sweep of the second hand, and you can see just how smoothly it sweeps using that 4 Hz frequency. I personally dislike 21,600 vibrations per hour and 3 Hz, which is a popular alternative to that beat rate and frequency as used by Seiko, for example, because it makes the second hand judder around the dial rather than sweeping smoothly. So Rolex have done a very good job using that beat rate and frequency for the caliber 3135. Now, over the years, it's been in use since 1988 to the present day, 2020. Rolex have made some enhancements to the caliber 3135 to improve its accuracy and its build quality. One of the most notable improvements that this one has is the Parachrome Blue hairspring. Now, the advantage of using a Parachrome Blue hairspring is that It has improved shock resistance and also it's more temperature resistant. So I really like the fact that the 3135 in this piece uses the Parachrome blue hairspring. Prior to that, 3135 movements used Breguet overcoil hairsprings, which weren't as good. They weren't as shock resistant and they weren't as temperature resistant. So excellent movement, well proven since 1988. However, it does have a negative. In 2020, 48 hours of power reserve really is unacceptable. Tudor are now producing in-house movements with 70-hour power reserves, and therefore 70 hours has now become the industry standard for automatic movements. Really, to still be producing a Rolex Submariner date in 2020 with only a 48-hour power reserve is embarrassing for Rolex. I really think it's overdue that Rolex should upgrade the Submariner dates to the caliber 3235 as used in the Sea Dweller. The 3235 isn't as well proven as the 3135, which it succeeds. But however, 90% of the parts in the caliber 3235 were redesigned when Rolex created it, and they also created a new high-performance lubricant, and the main purpose of that was to reduce friction in the movement and therefore make it more efficient, so it has a higher power reserve of 70 hours versus the 48 hours of its predecessor, the 3135. The other benefit of using that new high-performance lubricant is that it has extended the service interval on the Sea Dweller from 5 years to 10 years. So that's something that Rolex really should be implementing. I really expected this year them to upgrade this caliber 3135 used in the Submariner date to the caliber 3235. The skeletonized chronology in the 3235 with its skeletonized pallet fork really does produce more efficiency. So it's a better movement from a technical perspective because of the increased power reserve, but it still retains COSC certified accuracy. Now, I'll lastly talk about the accuracy of the movement. The caliber 3235 is certified as a superlative chronometer, as it states on the dial at the 6 o'clock position. So COSC certify the 3135 when the movement is out of the case, before it's cased in the watch, to chronometer limits of -4 seconds to +6 seconds per day. So every Submariner movement, the 3135, comes with a COSC certification. Rolex then also certify the movement themselves to an even better accuracy of ±2 seconds per day. Now I'm pleased to report that this movement is running at +1 second per day. And I think that's absolutely outstanding. I think it's just perfection. To get a chronometer movement running at +1 second per day is just a credit to Rolex's movement making capability. The 3135 is a very reliable, well-proven movement. So let's do a lume test, and I'll show you how the chromolites used on this watch performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. Now I regard Rolex chromolites to be the best lume in the world. There simply is nothing better. It reminds me of Swiss BGW9 Superluminova, very similar green tone. Now personally I dislike the blue tone of chromolites and Swiss BGW9 Superluminova. I actually prefer the green tone of tritium, and I also prefer the green tone of C3 Superluminova, which gives a very similar effect. And I think it's a mistake that Rolex made. The early Submariner, the first one, the 6204 and 6205, used radium lume, which was highly radioactive. And as a less radioactive alternative to radium, Rolex then switched to using tritium, which was still radioactive but emitted less radiation, so therefore was safer. And then tritium was then discontinued due to its radioactivity, and Rolex changed to using Luminova and then Superluminova. Currently they're using chromolite, which is the best quality lume they've ever used. And as you can see, the quality of the chromolite lume on the Submariner dates does not disappoint. It's glowing very brightly, and it will continue to glow for a very good length of time. The white gold's applied indices and also the white gold's Mercedes hands give a good large plot for the lume on the maxi dial. So nice large applied chromolite lume on each of the indices and also on the Mercedes hands. The lume pip on the triangle on the Cerachrome bezel also continues to glow very brightly for a good length of time. There simply is no better lume in the watchmaking industry than Rolex chromolite. I think it actually exceeds Swiss BGW9 Superluminova, which is also some of the best lume used. So very aesthetically pleasing, although personally I would have preferred if they used C3 Superluminova, because I think the Submariner looked better when it had green lume rather than the blue tone of Chromolite. So a major positive to the watch, exceptional lume quality. So lastly, I'll surmise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, I'll give you a wrist shot and you can see how it fits on my 8-inch wrist, and I'll talk you through the positives and the negatives of the piece. So as you can see, the bracelet does fit my 8-inch wrist very well. The bracelet is something I want to talk about because it's one of the main negatives to the watch. The Oyster bracelet on the Submariner date has 12 full links. On the 6 o'clock side it has 5 links. On the 12 o'clock side it has 7 links. So as you can see, it has an odd number of links. 5 on one side, 7 on the other. I need to wear the glide lock extension near the end of the extension, near its maximum, because I have a large 8-inch wrist. Because I like to wear my bracelets loose, as you can see, this is correctly sized so that I can fit an index finger underneath the bracelet at all times. Now, the problem is that means that the clasp doesn't sit centrally on my wrist, it actually sits offset. It sits offset to one side rather than centrally. And that's irritating. And that's due to Rolex simply putting 7 links on one side and 5 links on the other rather than 6 and 6. So I think they make a mistake in doing that, because the glide lock will always sit off center regardless of your wrist size, whether you have a 6, 7 or 8-inch wrist. It will never sit truly central to the head of the piece. With regards to the fit, the 48mm lug-to-lug measurement does fit to perfection, as I've discussed. However, I really dislike the thick lugs with only a 20mm lug width. As I've discussed, it should be 22, with a larger, thicker Oyster bracelet. Very aesthetically pleasing, very comfortable to wear on the wrist. The feel-good factor is 10 out of 10. I think it's a very eye-catching piece due to the anti-reflective coating being absent and the high-gloss finish of both the sapphire crystal and also the Cerachrome bezel. So yes, it's a good-looking piece to wear on the wrist. The feel-good factor is very satisfying, despite its shortcomings with regards to the bracelet and the lugs being too thick and out of proportion. So lastly, I'll just show you that imbalance of the glide lock clasp with the head of the piece, which really detracts from the comfort of wearing the piece for long periods of time. So if I hold the head of the piece in my hands, as you can see that the glide lock doesn't hang symmetrically underneath the head of the piece. It hangs off to one side. It's lopsided, as you can see. 5 links on one side, 7 links on the other side. It really doesn't make sense. Usually on watch bracelets they would have 6 and 6, so the bracelet's clasp would hang level. It would be symmetrical under the head of the piece. So I'm actually planning on removing one of the 7 links and taking the link on this side and putting it in on this side. So I will have 6 and 6, and that will rectify the problem. And it really just is a fault that Rolex makes the bracelets like this, with 5 links on one side and 7 on the other. It just doesn't look right. So overall, I think the watch is not excellent value. I think it's €8,650. There is room for improvement. If it had the caliber 3235 as used in the Sea Dweller with a 70-hour power reserve and a more efficient movement, I would say yes, at €8,650 it would be excellent value. So the value is okay, but it's not excellent. With regards to the quality, yes, it is an excellent quality watch. It's very well made. The quality of the finishing, the build quality, the quality control are all outstanding. So I would say to you, there are credible alternatives to the Submariner date. I think the Tudor Black Bay is a credible alternative, and I also think the Omega Planet Ocean is another credible alternative. They are both better value, but they're also both excellent quality. They also have excellent movements with better power reserves. So I would say to you, if you're considering a Submariner date, also consider the Tudor Black Bay and also consider the Omega Planet Ocean. I personally regard the Omega Planet Ocean's movements, the caliber 8900, which is METAS certified rather than COSC certified as a master chronometer, to be a technically better movement. The caliber 8900 Planet Ocean's movement is superior to the caliber 3135, that is the truth. So that's something to bear in mind. The Omega Planet Ocean uses a better movement, and one could argue the in-house movement in the Tudor Black Bay is better because it has 70 hours of power reserve compared to only 48 hours of the Submariner. So overall, I would say yes, it is an iconic heavy hitter piece, but it's not a champagne watch for lemonade money. There is room for improvement. I think when Rolex fit the 3235 to the Submariner date, then yes, it will improve it and it will become an excellent quality and excellent value watch. So I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Rolex Submariner date 116610LN. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you very much.